morning. It's really been a fun morning for me here at Christ Church. Thank you so much, Reverend Rana. I've been here a few times before, so this is the first time I've been here for worship, so what a delight. And it's nice to be here as neighbors. Bethlehem is really only a couple minutes away, so how neat is that? It's the words of the Psalms, how good it is when brothers and sisters come together, dwell together in harmony. So my mother sent me a cartoon the other day from the New Yorker. It was probably about 2 weeks ago, maybe you saw it, but it shows a mother speaking to her young daughter playing in a pile of leaves, and the caption says, "Remember, fall is just one of the many reasons you shouldn't leave your mother to go live in California." Does anybody have a similar experience? Well, my wife and I and our 2 boys have been living in Silicon Valley for a little more than 8 years. I grew up in Manhattan. And to be honest, I had no idea, and I think most people that grow up in Manhattan have no idea that Jews are a minority in this country. We're only around 1.5% of the total population of the United States, with about 7 million people in America. But as a kid, I simply had no idea that we as a people were so small in number. There are some other places in this country where the number of Jews is higher, more common, certainly Los Angeles and Miami, and even the Bay Area, actually, to a certain degree, not as big as New York or Los Angeles or Miami, but the suburbs of Cleveland, Shaker Heights, Ohio, there are a lot of Jews in Shaker Heights, Ohio, so Reverend Rana knew a lot of those and probably went to synagogue growing up a lot. When she spoke at Bethlehem last summer, she told the story of being a student in divinity school and having one of her teachers tell her, "Episcopalians have much more in common with Reformed Jews than, say, evangelical Christians. Look at how we interpret Scripture. Look at our social ethics and our sense of collective identity." Likely many of you agree with her teacher, and certainly the same can be said in my faith tradition as well, as I often feel more aligned with those here at Christ Episcopal Church than I do with more Orthodox Jews. My hunch is you have friends at Bethlehem, or some of you. There is a high likelihood that you've even been there, maybe celebrated a bar mitzvah or a wedding or grieved at a funeral with us in our sanctuary. Your children or your grandchildren probably go to school or play Little League or drama with many Bethlehem children, and there's a good chance that in just a few weeks your neighborhood will have a few Hanukkah menorahs alongside Christmas lights and trees. This is not to say we are the same. Certainly Christ Church and Bethlehem are different places, and those differences are good. If we all behave, acted, believed, prayed, and thought the same, life would be quite boring, and there isn't much worse in my mind than being boring. In fact, sacred differences and disagreements are some of the staples of Jewish tradition, of Jewish belief, and Jewish action. This is an idea deep in Jewish tradition and is most noted in 2 ancient Jewish scholars, or it's to the houses of 2 ancient Jewish scholars, named the House of Hillel and the House of Shammai. 2 different schools named after the sages who founded them, dating from around the year 0. They were famous for the vigorous debates they had with one another on topics concerning everything from Jewish law to Jewish ritual to Jewish belief. These debates were so prolific that the Mishnah, which is the first major work of rabbinic literature, which dates to around the year 200, records more than 300 disagreements between the two schools. If you grew up Jewish, it's more than likely you've heard about some of these classic debates. They are central to Jewish education, and they're taught in our religious school. The most famous of the debates is about how one lights the Hanukkah menorah. The house of Shammai says that you start with a full menorah, and each day you reduce the light until Hanukkah is over. The house of Hillel says you add light to an empty menorah each day until Hanukkah is over. As you may know, the house of Hillel is ruled more persuasive in this specific debate. And now, even 2,000 years later, each night of Hanukkah, we add a candle to our menorah. The reasoning behind that is the sages teach that you never want to decrease light, you only want to increase light during our sacred season. So I thought it'd be fun to try one of these ancient debates together. So take yourself back 2,000 years. If you forget to say the prayer after finishing the meal, if you forget to say the grace after meal prayer, which I know none of you would ever do, so it's only a hypothetical, but if you forgot to do that, should you, A, return to the place you ate the meal to recite the grace after the meal, or should you say it immediately in the place where you remembered? Thoughts, comments? So here, you should go back to the table where you ate the meal and say the prayer there. Is there a reason? That's where you consume the meal. If we think of food as holy and we recognize it took us a lot of work to get it, that's where we should say it. Yeah.
I think you should do it immediately because the meal isn't over until you say the prayer.
So the meal isn't over until you say the grace after the meal, so you should do it immediately. Anyone else?
You're less likely to forget if you have to go back.
So if you do it right away, you're less likely to forget, and so it encourages you to do it quickly. Yeah. All right, so you are deep in the schools of Hillel and Shammai, and so Jewish law sides with the house of Hillel, which says that you should recite the grace right when you remembered. All right, should we do one more? Yeah, let's do one more. All right. What should you say to a bride on her wedding day if the bride is not beautiful? The obvious answer is we shouldn't even be engaged in this discussion. And not commenting on people's beauty is generally a smart idea. But this is an ancient debate. So, should you still call the bride beautiful? So there's more than one level of beauty, right? So it's okay to call her beautiful, right? So good. Anyone else? So it's similar. There's different kinds of beauty. So we should. There's nothing. We shouldn't hesitate at all to call the bride beautiful. Yeah.
The celebration of their love is beautiful. She's part of that. All brides are beautiful.
This is such a romantic congregation that you have here. So I think the debate that they're having is really about this idea of a white lie, right? Is it acceptable? When is it acceptable to potentially, to not tell the full truth in this situation? And it's really asking us to have a conversation about honesty. So taking on that side, there is an argument that would say that the house of Shammai would say you should tell the truth. You should not lie. And one should praise the bride as she is. The house of Hillel says that we should greet each bride with the words, "She is a beautiful and gracious bride." Jewish tradition generally sides with the house of Hillel, the ones that say we should greet each bride with the words, "She is a beautiful and gracious bride." All right, one more. This is a classic rabbinical debate here. Should pitchers be required to bat for themselves, or should each team appoint a designated hitter that does not play the field in the lineup? Oh, no, sorry, that's not a rabbinical debate. That's something altogether different. So with hundreds of disagreements, you might think that the two scholarly houses would have detested one another. The Montagues and the Capulets of rabbinic literature. But that's not the case. Even though they disagreed often and even contentiously, the two scholarly houses got along and even admired each other. The Talmud, which is a 5th century Jewish sacred text, discusses the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. Although the house of Shammai, it says, although the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel are in disagreement on questions of rivals, family, marriage, divorce, money, valuables, and more, the house of Shammai did not, nevertheless, abstain from marrying members of the families of the house of Hillel. Nor did the house of Hillel refrain from marrying those of the house of Shammai. This is to teach you that they showed love and friendship towards one another, thus putting into practice the scriptural text that says, "Love, truth, and peace shall reign." The debates were intense, the issues fierce, but despite it all, the houses came together. They didn't let their debates cause a breach between the community, which could have led to division between one another. In fact, the two houses valued the other ones to a degree that even intermarriage between the two schools were permissible. It's taught in rabbinic literature that the arguments between the houses of Hillel and the houses of Shammai are considered arguments in Hebrew, machlochet l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven. Jewish sages speak of two types of controversy. L'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, positive, enriching, life-affirming. These were the debates of Hillel and Shammai. The other types of controversies are not for the sake of heaven, divisive, turf-driven, and ones where there is no negotiation or dialogue, where others aren't treated with respect and dignity. The ancient rabbis talk about these arguments, the arguments not for the sake of heaven, as the arguments of Korach, the rebellion against Moses in the desert. The arguments that for the sake of heaven demand profound respect for other human beings, even if their viewpoints are fundamentally and unequivocally the polar opposite of our own. The beauty of this idea is that the tradition encourages us to engage. It doesn't say we should not have debates. It doesn't say we should not have arguments. The double negative is intentional. We are commanded to engage. We are commanded to have disagreements, and we are commanded to have arguments. There's an old quip that says, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. This is not an expression from out of the blue. Much of Jewish tradition and much of Jewish life is built on argumentation and disagreement. We are supposed to dive into the deepest, meatiest issues of our day. And while they might feel archaic or petty or silly to us, the arguments of the house of Hillel and the arguments of the house of Shammai were crucial for the society in which they lived. The debates were significant and relevant. They were legal, they were political, and they were personal. And they would have been nearly impossible to avoid. It's actually one of the reasons I'm so touched to be here with you this morning. Simply put, the way we know our neighbors matters. As Jews, we regard interfaith engagement as indispensable to the attainment of mutual understanding in a robust, pluralistic society. The work of social justice, including protecting the environment or advocating for immigration reform, can often be best accomplished through interreligious efforts. An honest, open dialogue is the best platform for our two communities to partner towards repairing the world. Beth Am has a long and deep history with All Saints Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, and it's been so fun to be able to begin the dialogue here with Christ Church as we encourage sacred communication between the communities. You also can probably guess what brought me to this sermon topic this morning. I'm not here to give commentary, but I do wish that we could celebrate debate within a society and insist that the tone in arguments be carried out in a passionate, thoughtful, and civil manner. We should insist that every discourse be done with respect in a sense that compromise is no vice, and changing one's mind because of new information is not a failure or a flip-flop. We should not seek to demean those who disagree with us. We should not sling mud at good individuals simply because they have a worldview different than our own. And while we might not select our elected representatives for how they treat others, I do believe the moral standard that emanates from their debates and their conversation sets the tone for the behavior and dialogue for all of us. I'm certainly not saying that we need to engage in a two-sided approach on every issue. I don't have the time or energy to engage with people who deny facts or history. In the words of Edward R. Murrow, one cannot accept that there are on every story two equal and logical sides to an argument. There is no sacred argument to be had with Holocaust deniers, or racists, or even climate change deniers. However, we can make a difference, and perhaps the best way to impact the national discourse is for each of us to hold up our disagreements in the manner of an argument for the sake of heaven. As we think about our Thanksgiving tables, sometimes places filled with disagreements, can we aspire to be models of arguments for the sake of heaven? It's actually something you're beginning to model in your living room chats that I was blessed to be a part of just a half hour ago. So Jewish tradition provides suggestions on how to have arguments for the sake of heaven. I'll share them with you. The first suggestion is humility. In Hebrew, the word anava. When we argue, do so not only with respect, but also with humility. If we use statements like, I believe, I feel, and don't presume to tell other people what they are thinking. If they do tell you what they're thinking, do not have a knee-jerk reaction. Recognize that you may need to ponder their view to clarify your own. Furthermore, we may be wrong. If we hear divergent viewpoints presented in a constructive way, Everyone can learn and grow. This is part of the season we're entering. Number 2, honor. The word in Hebrew is kavod. When in a disagreement, remember that it often takes risk to disagree with people. We should strive to treat people with kavod, with honor. It's important to honor others' courage, especially those who put themselves in a vulnerable place. If you've ever been the only voice thinking one way in a room of people who think another, we know how difficult this position can be. We should hold the rights for all opinions, even when we disagree. 3, holiness. The word in Hebrew is kiddushah. One of my teachers, Rabbi Eugene Borowitz, would teach about sitting on the New York City subway and looking at all of the people on the subway car. And as he was doing that, he would whisper to himself, image of God, image of God, image of God, image of God. If he was able to find the holiness in each and every person on the New York City subway, we can find the holiness in people that we disagree with. Each person, it's taught, has a spark of holiness within them. And then 4, for the sake of peace. Mipnei darchei shalom in Hebrew. Sometimes it's okay not to engage. We don't need to pick every battle. The house of Hillel, in the debate we just discussed about what to say to a bride who is not beautiful, decided that there are simply topics not worth arguing about. The values of peace, the value of shalom, in the home and in society are important ones. And it's okay to say, sometimes I'm not going to engage. The lesson is our speech matters. We are taught that our tongues should be as honest as our scales. The end of the prophetic passage that we read this morning, the passage from the book of Jeremiah, casts an image of the coming of the Messiah. It's whether you're Jewish and you don't believe the Messiah has come, or you're Christian and you believe in a messianic world with Jesus as the Messiah, it's the same image. It's the same hope. The prophet says, the days are surely coming, says God, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king, and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. And this is the name by which he will be called. God is our righteousness. This ancient idea remains true today. Our actions together as different communities of faith can bring about the Messiah. May all our endeavors strive to be for the sake of heaven. Thank you.